Hello everybody and welcome to the TF1 show. Now this week was a bit of a quieter week. There wasn't any races on. There wasn't much happening in terms of news in Formula 1. But at least I guess we can now look forward to the Russian Grand Prix coming up this week. In any case, today I decided to treat all of you to a bit of a midterm progress report, I guess. Just impart my thoughts on all of the drivers so far and maybe give each of them a bit of a score out of 10 based off how I think they've performed up to now, given that it's more or less halfway through the season now, if I'm not mistaken. Could be slightly over the halfway mark, but I guess now is as good as time as any to have a bit of a think about driver performances and to think about how each of them did. And what I thought could be even more interesting is maybe to pull in our little F1 content creator community rankings that we've been doing over the season so far. Now, for those of you who don't know or don't follow me on Twitter, after every race weekend, me and a couple of great friends that I've made that are all content creators in Formula 1, we essentially rate each driver's performance out of 10 for the race, and then I do a bit of math and come up with, I guess, the averages per driver per race. Now, obviously, with all of this wealth of information that I have at my disposal, I quickly went and calculated, in aggregate over the season, what have we been giving each driver out of 10 for their performances over the year? So I thought what could be interesting is after I give each driver my own personal rating for the season so far, we can compare and see how close we came or how close I come to what we as the F1 content community think each driver should be getting. So I thought best would be to start in alphabetical order. So we will go through each of the teams, starting with Alfa Romeo and with Antonio Giovinazzi. Look, now Antonio, he tried. He did his best. He had an interesting season last year as a rookie in Formula 1. And I have to say this year I did hope we were going to see a bit more from Antonio, a bit more consistency, a bit more passion, because you'd think as an Italian he'd be a bit more, it's just like he's a bit white bread, isn't he? Like, it's a bit, like you can see he does the job, but I don't really see him laying it all on the line every week. And unfortunately in his race performances, it's been as inconsistent as what it was last year. So I think I'm going to give him a 4 out of 10 for his efforts so far this year. So obviously not great. And with how things are going at the moment, I'm worried, or not worried, but suspicious that he might be dropped at the end of the year. But let's see what happens. Now, for interest's sake, and I have my little list here in front of me with all of the scores. Now, the F1 content community gave Giovinazzi an average of 4.35 out of 10 over the season so far. So, yeah, pretty close to F1 content creator community. I think that was quite well done. Now, let's talk about Giovinazzi's teammate, Kimi Raikkonen. Now, I have to say, when I heard that there are rumors of him being replaced for next year, I thought, you know what? It's for the better. I have no doubt that Kimi is still a capable race driver, albeit with almost no motivation. I don't really see, any motivation for Kimi Raikkonen to continue driving other than getting a nice paycheck and getting a bit of an adrenaline rush every now and again. But his last 2 races, I have to say, have been quite impressive, especially compared to his teammates and I guess the car that he's driving, which is let's say the Alfa Romeo isn't the best vehicle on the grid. I mean, it's possible that the safety car might actually be faster in terms of overall potential. But I think, given everything that I've now said, Kimi Raikkonen deserves a 6 out of 10 for his season so far, because he has had a couple of good races recently. However, the first couple of races weren't that great. So keeping that in mind, I think a 6 out of 10 for Kimi from me so far, with the F1 content community giving him a 5.34 out of 10. So a bit harsher on Kimi, the F1 content creators, than I was, which I find surprising because Kimi is actually quite a popular guy. So, you'd think he'd get the benefit of the doubt. But anyway, 6 out of 10 for me for Kimi Raikkonen. So let's move on to the second AlphaTauri on my list, and to who's potentially been one of the stars of this season, Pierre Gasly. Now, people might be upset with me because a lot of people are going to say, Pierre deserves a 10 out of 10 for his season. He's done so well despite all of the difficulties and all of the trauma and all of the tragedy that he's faced. But I still think that there were races and places where Pierre could have done better. So overall, I'm going to give him an 8.5 out of 10, which is still a really, really good score. And I still think, and you'll look at, if you look at my list at the end of this episode, he still did a really good job overall, and he's still one of the top scorers. But an 8.5 out of 10 for Pierre, with the content community giving him a 7.25. Now, I don't know what Pierre Gasly did to the F1 content creators community, but a 7.25 is actually pretty low. So, gonna have to chat with them, I think, after this. And, just looking at the list quickly, again, there are probably going to be a couple of more contentious ones as well. So that's fun. Let's talk about Kvyat. Now, Kvyat, when you look at his season in isolation, actually didn't perform that badly, or he's not doing that terribly. I think compared to Gasly, it's been a bit average. I think, to me, he falls a bit in that Giovinazzi category. It's just been a bit bland, a bit vanilla. So I give him a 6.5 out of 10 because I do think he's not been doing terribly. I just think next to his teammate, he hasn't been doing as well. And the content creators community has agreed with me to a large extent with a score of 5.88 out of 10. Again, seems like there's a bit of a trend with me being more generous with my ratings, which is an interesting development. I'm not going to lie. So yeah, 6.5 out of 10 for Pierre Gasly. And now we can move on to a big ticket item, if you can call it that, with Sebastian Vettel and Scuderia Ferrari. Now, I gave him, and please don't crucify me, I gave him 5.5 out of 10 for very good reasons. I know the Ferrari is the Ferrari, and it's a slow car, but Vettel has been struggling despite that. I think maybe he's been making the car look even worse than what it is. I don't know. Because, Leclerc has been getting consistent top 10 performances in that car, and Vettel just hasn't been. And yes, I know the car might not necessarily suit his driving characteristics, but at the end of the day, you need to adapt as a driver as well. That's what separates the greats from just the very goods. And at this moment, I don't think Vettel is doing that amazingly, despite the fact that his car sucks. And the content creators community is very much in agreement with me because they've given him a 5.52 out of 10, which is essentially exactly the same score as what I've given. So yeah, it's not the best final season for Vettel at Ferrari, but at least we now know he has, greener pastures to look forward to next year at Aston Martin. Charles Leclerc is next, and I've given him 7.5 out of 10. I think he's been a decently consistent performer, lucked into 2 podiums slightly, but still drove the wheels off the car when he had to. Also had a few not so nice incidents this season so far. So for that reason, 7.5 out of 10 for Charles, with the content creator community giving him a 6.62 out of 10. So again, me being more generous than the masses. Kevin Magnussen, Haas, next Ferrari team in my crosshairs. Kevin Magnussen, to me, is doing okay. Not doing amazing, but he's doing okay. He's doing better than the car on the other side of the garage. Not that is necessarily such a big achievement, but Magnussen from me gets a 6 out of 10. And if you think about it, that's the same score as Kimi Raikkonen. So I think they've more or less been performing on the same level. Maybe Magnussen has had a couple of, inconsistencies as well. He's had some reliability trouble too. So I think 6 out of 10 is a fair reflection for Kevin Magnussen. And here I feel the content creators community has been, again, quite strict with poor Kevin, giving him a 4.92 out of 10, which is basically a fail. So Kevin Magnussen, in the eyes of the F1 content creators community, you have failed at Formula One. So something to just ponder over as you prepare for the Russian Grand Prix. Next on the list is our favorite punching bag, Romain Grosjean. And unfortunately, I'm going to have to give him a 4 out of 10, which, to be fair, it could have been worse, because there has been races, during this year where I thought to myself, what is he doing? Like, if you look at the wealth of talent in Formula 2, waiting for a seat, and then you have Romain Grosjean trying to be Max Verstappen light with his defensive maneuvers at Silverstone, I did wonder for a moment as to, what he is still doing in Formula 1. But I thought that his drive in Mugello was a good one. I thought he did a good job. So for that reason, I have elevated his score from a 3 out of 10 to a 4 out of 10. And this has actually been one of the few occasions where I've been less strict, or more strict, than the F1 content creators community, because they've given Romain Grosjean a 4.48 out of 10 for his valiant efforts so far this season. Right, so let's move on to the McLaren boys. And this might be a bit of a controversial one, but I will try and defend my score as much as possible, because I gave Carlos Sainz a 9 out of 10. Now, hear me out. Carlos has been incredibly unlucky during the season so far. And yes, he has less points on the board than Lana Norris. But the one area where he was lagging behind Lando last season was qualifying. And he has so far actually outqualified Lando. And especially over the last couple of races, has been convincingly the better qualifier compared to Lando Norris. Couple that with his stronger race performances throughout, despite the fact that he was hampered by reliability issues, pit stop issues, other misfortunes happening. I think Carlos Sainz has done very, very little wrong so far this season. Actually, trying to think, I can't think of anything that jumps out at me where he actually dropped the ball in terms of his race performances or his qualifying performances. So that's why I'm giving Carlos a 9 out of 10. Now, if you compare this to the content community ratings, it is quite a bit higher, where they've given him a 6.99, which is obviously a 7 out of 10. But you know what? I'm going to stand by my opinion. I think Carlos deserves a really high score, and actually he's probably been one of the strongest performers of the year so far. Now let's move on to his teammate, Lando Norris. Now Lando, again, I think he got a very high score from me as well, and I think deservedly so. So he got a half a point less than what I gave Carlos. So I gave Lando an 8.5 out of 10, which is in line with Pierre Gasly, who I think that makes sense as well. Maybe in fairness to Gasly, just to get back to his score before people shout at me or, threaten harm upon me. Gasly had a shocker at Mugello, and I think if he didn't have that bad of a race, he probably would have gotten a 9 out of 10 from me to be in line with Carlos. But I think I had to deduct half a point from Pierre Gasly's score based on the fact that he really didn't drive a good race in Mugello, despite the fact that he won in Monza. And in any case, we digress. Back to Lando Norris. So Lando, 8.5 out of 10, really strong, consistent performer in qualifying and in the race, has done his job incredibly well. I think he hasn't always been as strong as Carlos on average. I think despite, the scores being in the opposite direction, I think Lando maybe is lagging behind Carlos in a couple of areas at the moment, but let's reassess at the end of the year. And just for comparative purposes, the community rating for Lana Norris was 7.33 out of 10. So again, quite a good score, albeit slightly more strict than what I gave him. Alrighty, next is our front-running team, Mercedes, with Valtteri Bottas and Lewis Hamilton. Now, I'm going to be honest, and I've been quite public on this show with my view on Valtteri Bottas recently. I've given him a 6 out of 10 because, yes, he's won a race, but after that, it's just been going downhill. I think Valtteri has been on the struggle bus, especially compared to a very, very strong Lewis Hamilton. So it's not been great. It's not been great for Valtteri, especially in qualifying where he's supposed to be at his strongest. So I'm gonna give Valtteri that 6 out of 10, compared to the content creators community who gave him a 7.33 out of 10, which is the same as Lana Norris. And I think the content community needs to look itself in the mirror and ask itself what its priorities are, because giving Bottas the same score in aggregate as Lana Norris, if you look at their relative performances, might be slightly insulting for Lando. So something to think about, potentially. Anyways, let's move on to Lewis. Now, I've given him 9.5 out of 10 because, quite frankly, I think, except maybe for the first weekend, he's been pretty faultless. He's maximized, I think, essentially what he was able to do. He's been really strong in qualifying, which is maybe what his weakness was last year compared to his teammate. He's as strong as he ever was in the races. And essentially the reason I deducted half a mark here was because of that first weekend and because of the fact that he didn't win that second race in Silverstone. So that's essentially Lewis Hamilton, and quite aligned with the content creators community who gave him a 9.09 out of 10 on average. So yeah, Lewis is having another incredible season. Of course, helped along by his car, but the way that he's been executing everything that he has to execute has been really, really impressive. So well done, Lewis, for that. Next is the pink Mercedes, sticking with our Mercedes theme, Racing Point and Sergio Perez. Now, obviously, Sergio Perez is out of a seat at the moment, which to me is quite unfortunate. I'm not going to lie. I think he deserves a seat in Formula One. I think he's done so well over the last couple of years. However, I will admit that so far this year, he hasn't been setting the world alight. I expected more from Sergio, given how well he has driven in that Racing Point over previous seasons. But I still think he's done well. He's been consistent. He's scored good points for the team. So for that reason, I'm giving him a 7.5 out of 10, which is still good and quite in line with the F1 content creators community that has given him on average a 7.2 out of 10. So good job there for you, Sergio. However, I'll have to admit that his teammate has probably been the stronger one out of the two so far in Lance Stroll. Of course, he got the podium in Monza, but despite that, I don't think that should necessarily define his performance so far this season, because he's been doing a really, really good job. So yeah, Lance Stroll, I give it 8 out of 10, which is a really good score, I think, for how well he's done, and slightly more generous than the content creators community score of 7.03. Next is Red Bull, and again, please don't attack me for being biased, because as I'll show you, the content creators community score is basically the same as mine, because for Alex Albon so far, I've given a 7 out of 10. Now, obviously, we know that it's been difficult for Alex a couple of races so far this season, and there is still a bit of a gap between him and Max, especially in qualifying, where it's at this moment quite important to qualify as far ahead as possible given how close the midfield is. But I think, taking everything into account, Alex has had a decent enough season at Red Bull. He's finally gotten that podium, so that monkey's off his back, and for that reason he gets a 7 out of 10, which, as I said, is quite in line with the 6.86 out of 10 that the content creators community has given him up to this point. Now, his teammate, obviously Max Verstappen, has been performing at such a high level, and for that reason I'm actually giving him the same score as what I gave Hamilton, because again, he really hasn't done much wrong where things were within his control. I think he's maximized his race opportunities. He got that victory when he had to. So all around, Max is driving incredibly well. And yeah, 9.5 out of 10 for Max, I would say, up to this point, which is quite a lot more generous than the content creators community that's given him a 7.82 out of 10, which I feel is maybe slightly lowballing how well Max has done. Maybe correcting for reliability troubles that he's obviously had the last 2 races. Next on our list is Renault, with Esteban Ocon going first. Now, again, if you're a regular listener of this channel, you'll know that I have a bit of a soft spot for Esteban, just because I think that in there, at the moment, deep in there, there is a very good race driver, and I think he is crawling his way towards the very high standard that Daniel Ricciardo is setting at the moment. And for that reason, I think he falls into a similar bucket as Alex Albon, and I've given him a 7 out of 10, which I think is a pretty respectable score for somebody that had to make his return next to a really, really highly rated teammate in a team with quite a lot of pressure riding on its shoulders. And just to compare to the content creators community score, that is around 6.22. So pretty in line. Pretty happy with that, actually. Now, Daniel Ricciardo is my 3rd star of the season so far, and I've also given him a 9.5 out of 10 because, similar to Max and Lewis, he's very much rarely put a foot wrong. I think maybe in qualifying he's struggled here or there, but in a midfield as difficult as what he has to deal with this year, I think it's really hard to be up there each and every weekend when it's a matter of a half a tenth that can decide 3 or 4 places on the grid. So Daniel Ricciardo, especially recently, has really impressed me and has been consistently fast and really impressive overall. So a 9.5 out of 10 for Daniel Ricciardo, which compares to a 7.32 given by the content creators community. So again, interesting that they are rating him so much lower. I guess maybe due to the fact that his first couple of races could have been slightly stronger, but I think overall he's done as well as what he could potentially have done this season so far. Alrighty, last on my list is the Williams team. Now, George Russell, again, he's been so good in qualifying. I think definitely we started to see a couple of developmental areas for him in the race. But for that reason, I've given him an 8 out of 10, which is still a really high score, one of the higher ones on this list. But maybe if he had 1 or 2 stronger race performances, it could have been slightly higher at this point. Compared to the content creators community, around 6.7 out of 10 that they've given him. So again, I'm slightly above, but I do feel it's deserved for George. He has improved so much this year already compared to last year. He still has that unbeaten qualifying record against his teammate, which in itself is quite impressive. So good on you, George. Good on you, George. Last on my list is Nicholas Latifi, and I'm just going to be very careful because one of my fellow content creators, Beth F1, I don't know if you know her. If you don't, go and watch her channel. She's really cool and really, really nice content to watch. But she has a bit of a soft spot for Nicholas Latifi, so I'm always quite careful around what I say about him and his performances. So Nicholas he's done a good job, I think. I don't really think there's much I can say more than he's done a good job, Nicholas. And I think for that good job that he's done so far, he gets a 6.5 out of 10, which is in line with, just looking at the scores, Daniel Kvyat, who has also done a good job. So I think 6.5 out of 10 is very fair for Nicholas Latifi, given everything that he's done so far this year. And comparing that to the content creator score of 5.41, then all of a sudden it becomes very impressive at 6.5. So congratulations, Nicholas Latifi, on your magnificent achievement of 65%. Now, that, ladies and gentlemen, is all of the scores that I wanted to give today. I want you to tell me whether you agreed with the scores that I've given. Do you think I was too generous? Do you think I was too harsh on them? Did I grievously mistake any of the scores that I was supposed to give? Did I miss important information? Am I perhaps a psychopath that doesn't understand the ins and outs of Formula One? Let me know in the comments. Happy to discuss, happy to debate. So if you're keen to do that, leave me a little comment below this video or this podcast or whatever platform you're listening on, and happy to chat about it. I feel pretty good about my ratings personally. I think they're a fair reflection of the drivers' performances, but always happy to hear more opinions. Before I go, just a reminder, if you do enjoy this channel, please hit the subscribe button. It's always great if I can get more people listening to me because, vanity. And yeah, enjoyed chatting to all of you in the comments and over social media. So you can go follow me on Twitter there as well. I'm at TF1 Show on Twitter. And yeah, looking forward to the Russian Grand Prix. It's gonna be exciting to watch everyone race again.